Hello and welcome. In this lesson, I'll show you how to use modifiers on your elements so that you can really fine-tune how your layout looks and behaves. All right, let's do it. Hi, my name is Chris and welcome to Code with Chris, where we help beginners build an app even if they've never coded before. Now that you've got your feet wet with SwiftUI, do you like it better than UIKit? Let me know yes or no in the comment section below. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button on your way down there, I would really appreciate it. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and getting my channel out there. Thank you so much. With that said, let's get started. Now here I've got a basic SwiftUI Xcode project with a single text element saying modify me. I'm going to change the appearance, behavior, and layout of this text element to demonstrate how modifiers work. Now there are actually two different ways we can go about adding modifiers to this text element. Number one is by directly typing in the code into the code editor on the left-hand side. But number two, which is the way that I'm going to show you first, is to do it visually through the Xcode interface. And the reason why I'm going to show you this way first is because by doing it visually through Xcode, it's actually going to generate the code and update the code editor. And then we can go and talk about that code. And then later on, I'll show you how to just type it in directly. All right, so what we're going to do here is on the right-hand side, open up the inspector pane. If you don't have it, it's this button here. Oh, and one thing to note is that in order to do it visually through Xcode, you have to be able to see this canvas, which means that you need to be running macOS Catalina or above. So if you can see this preview, then you're going to be able to do it visually. If not, then just sit back, take a look at what I'm doing, and as soon as I start doing it through the code, by typing it out, you'll be able to follow along as well. All right, so let's go ahead and select the text element here. And then in the inspector pane, under this attributes inspector, you're going to see all of these different attributes that you can modify on this text element. This is very much like using UIKit and storyboards, right? All right, so we're going to select modify me, this text element here. First, we're going to change the weight. We're going to change it to heavy, and you'll instantly see it reflected in the preview, but also the code has changed in the code editor. All right, so let's just quickly take a look at what happened there. And it actually put it on a second line, but if I were to just, close that, do that, then it starts to look very familiar, right? It looks like you're calling a method on the text object or text element, which is exactly what you're doing. You're calling this font weight method on it. It accepts a single parameter indicating the actual weight, and we're passing in heavy. So that's essentially what a modifier is. You're just calling a method on the SwiftUI element. And the reason they put it on the second line like that is because as soon as you chain together more and more modifiers, it's going to get really messy if it's just in one line, which I'll show you in a second. And that also alludes to my second point, is chaining together modifiers. How do you modify this text element a bit more? So let's show the canvas, and let's show the inspector, and let's try to add another modifier to this element. So click on this guy, let's change the color to purple. So I'm going to choose purple there, and it's changed the code again, and you'll see it reflected right there, but let's just take a look at that. So you can see how this list is neat and tidy, right? I can clearly tell that that's a text element. We've modified it in terms of the font weight, and then we've called another modifier to change the foreground color. If it was all in one line, you can see what a mess that looks like. It's really hard to make out what sort of modifications you've done on it, right? So that's why you should indent it right before the dot in this dot notation. And then you're going to get a nice list of modifiers. All right, so, and one thing to note is that if you were to do this programmatically, you would essentially be typing it out, right? So you would instead be doing this, font weight, and then you'd put in heavy, and you'd hit enter, and then you'd go foreground color, dot, purple. That's going to give you the exact same result. I just wanted to show you doing it visually. Now, we've modified the appearance of the text element, but I alluded to modifiers being able to change the behavior and also the layout of the SwiftUI elements as well, right? So I'm going to show you that. Let's change the behavior of this text element. Let's, you know what, because it's only a single line, it's kind of hard to see, but I will center align this text. And it's added a modifier called multi-line text alignment and passed in center. So that's gonna, if I had more text, it would be centering that text. Maybe if I just add a little bit more, you can see that. Right, centering that text. All right. Now, in terms of changing the layout, you know, one thing you can do is add padding. Let's say you wanted to add some padding to the left and right side. So there is a modifier for that. Let's do it visually first, and you can see what the code looks like. I'm going to enable left padding and right padding. And you can see that the padding, actually, that's not the best example. So why don't we just do left first? So you can see that it's called a padding modifier, and it's passed in the leading edge because that's what I want to pad. And by default, it pads it by 20 points. So you don't need to pass in any parameter. But if you wanted to pad it by a specific amount, right? Let's say I wanted to pad it by 50, like that. You can see that it does accept the second parameter indicating how much you want to pad it by. And if you wanted to pad a couple of different edges, you can, let's say, do the top as well. And now, instead of just passing in leading, you're passing in an array with all of the edges that you want to add this 50-point padding to. So you can see that. Now, what was interesting is that when I did just left and right, it changed the parameter to horizontal, meaning I guess that's just a default that includes left and right. All right, so now you might be wondering, you know, modifiers are great, but if the modifier, like, are these all the modifiers that I can add to the text element? And the answer is no. There's actually a lot of modifiers that you can add to a lot of different SwiftUI elements. Some are unique to the element, but some are common to all views, which is essentially what a SwiftUI element is. If you hit this drop down here, you can just look at all of the different modifiers, the ways that you can change the look, the behavior, and the layout of the element. Now, the more you use these, the more you're just going to know it by heart. So if you want to do something with the element, you're not sure kind of like how to do it, I would look through this modifier list first and see if there's one that looks like something that you need. Play around with it, and then over time, you will know what's available. There's no point in trying to memorize this or anything like that. All right, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you a little bit of a more practical example. I'm going to delete this element and I'm going to add an image, and we're going to add some modifications to it to make it look more like the stuff that you see in apps these days. So let's actually, before we delete this text element, let's go ahead and add an image asset into our project. Now, I've already got an image asset prepared, and you can find it in the resources for this project. It's one of the welcome lessons that links to the folder where you can download all of the code and assets and stuff like that. You're going to find this pink building asset under this lesson. Now, you don't have to use this. You can use any image you want. There are no size restrictions or whatnot. It's just a demonstration. So I'm going to go ahead and add this pink building to my asset library. And I'm going to go back to my content view now. And I'm going to just delete the text and add an image element and pass in a pink building. Let's hit resume so we can take a look at the actual photo. And there it is. Now, this is actually a small window of the larger image because SwiftUI doesn't assume that I want to fit the image into the view. So it displays the image at its native size, centering it. Those are the assumptions that it's made. But if I wanted to fit the image into the view, I can add a modifier to the image called resizable. Now this one you're probably going to be using a lot, and by calling this modifier on an image element, it lets the layout system know that you're okay with having that image resized. Now by default, the aspect ratio is maintained, so it maintains the aspect ratio and it tries to fit that image within the view without scaling it. But what if I wanted to, let's say, stretch this image and use it as a background? Well, I can do that. First, I'm going to call another modifier called ignore safe area. And the safe area, just for review, because you learned this in my beginner series and stuff like that, is this area here. This is called the safe area is where you see the image now. The not safe area, I guess, would be all of the white parts. And the not safe area is are basically places where potentially it could get covered, or it could get blocked, or there could be text overlaying it. So you don't want to put elements there. But for a background image, you might want to. So there is a modifier called ignore, edges ignore safe area, and then you pass in all the edges that you want to ignore the safe area for. So when you do that, it just, you can see the image go into the safe area now. Now, just in case you do want to change the aspect ratio, I'll show you another modifier called, you guessed it, aspect ratio. And the content mode, you can set it to fill or fit. Now, by default, it is set to fit, and basically that means to maintain the aspect ratio but still fit the image inside the view. Fill will make sure it tries to cover all of the space while still trying to maintain that aspect ratio. All right, so what I actually wanted to do with this image, though, I'm just going to go back here. I wanted to make it sort of like a floating card, because you see a lot of images like that these days. So what I'm going to start by doing is just adding padding. So instead of specifying insets and specifying how much padding I want, I'm simply going to be calling padding. When you just call the padding modifier without passing any parameters in, it assumes that you want padding on all of the edges at 20 points. So that's what it's giving me right here. And then next I'm going to actually organize my modifier list, because I'm going to be adding a lot. I hit enter, I'm going to add a second one, and I'm going to call corner radius. This modifier will give me rounded corners, and I get to pass in what sort of degree of rounding that I want. Now take a look at this. I called this corner radius, right, expecting some sort of rounded corner, but clearly it's not working. And I know my view has been updated because there is no question here asking me if I want to resume the preview. So this is the latest state. But where are my rounded corners? So this part is really interesting, because the order of the modifiers that I have added actually matters. And that is what the problem is right now. You see, let me rearrange this. If I add the corner radius here, and then I add the padding, you can see that I get the result that I want. So what's going on here? Let's illustrate. The order actually matters. So here I've removed the padding and I've applied the corner radius, right? So you get this sort of result, and then you're adding the padding on top of that result, right? And it pads it. But what about the other way around, like what we did? If I did padding first, I get that padded image, but then when I add the corner radius, like that, it's actually applying the corner radius to that part, right? Which essentially is just my padding. So it's adding the corner radius to my padding. That's why you don't see the actual image here having rounded corners. So take note that the order you apply these modifiers in, it actually matters. So what I actually want to do is to do that. So apply my corner radius first, and then add padding to the whole thing. And then to take it a step further, I want to add some shadow, some drop shadow to this image. And with SwiftUI, it's really easy because there is a shadow modifier. All I have to do is do that. You can see a slight shadow being cast under my image. It's pretty diffused, but there it is there. Well, maybe if I didn't set the radius so much, I would see a little bit more of it. All right, there we go. Next up, I'm also going to put it in a VStack, and let's put the text right under it. So I'm going to have my text element. This pink building is totally amazing. And we're going to add some modifiers to this guy. So much like before, we had the heavy font weight. We're also going to have the foreground color, and this time let's choose pink. And we're also going to set the font itself. And I'm going to change the font to, these are some of the presets that I can do, a large title type of text. So you can do that. And then you can do alignment, multi-line text alignment, and I can center that. And then lastly, I can do a shadow. I want to show you a different shadow method. See this one where you can set the shadow color, and you can also set, you can control it a little bit more. So you can control which way the shadow is going. So I'm going to say the color is going to be red. The radius is going to be, I'm going to use a really tight radius so it looks like, I'll show you what it looks like. So it's not diffused. That's really hard to read. Okay, let's just use black. All right, so it looks something like that. So by having a really tight radius, it's not diffused. It just doesn't look like it's a blur shadow. It's a really sharp shadow. Yeah. All right, so now that I've showed you some modifiers and how easy it is to use, I have a challenge for you. Now, if you look under the challenge folder in the resources for this lesson, you're going to see that you have all of the assets that you need to try to recreate this layout. Now, just to give you a hint, you're going to need to use what you've learned in this lesson as well as the previous lessons on layout containers and those sorts of elements there in order to achieve this effect. I highly recommend that you try it out because it's really going to give you that extra practice and solidify your understanding of modifiers. All right, in this lesson, you learned that each SwiftUI element can be configured by calling methods on them. You can do this to change how they behave, how they look, and also how they are positioned. In the next lesson, we'll talk about what state properties are and how your UI can automatically change and adapt according to what the state properties values are. If you enjoyed this lesson and you don't want to miss the next one, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and turn on bell notifications as well so you can get an email when the next video comes out. All right, I'll see you in the next lesson.